I'm not late. You're just here early.
Thank you so much for making it to part 2 of our BFA night. I'm going to introduce Gabe, and then I will let Gabe take it away. Gabe Seevak is an artist from Boston, Massachusetts, and his work focused on geometric shapes and architectural influences to create pieces that represent the constructed reality we all live in. So with that, let's give Gabe a hand of applause.
Thank you all for being here. Holy shit. Holy shit. I I just want to start with I haven't been to a school all the way through. The school's been through since elementary school. So for me to be here right now, for me to have gone from freshman year all the way up until now, um, it's taken a lot from me, and I've put a lot into it, and I hope you all are able to see that. But thank you, because this means so fucking much to me. I'm gonna get into it right now. So I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, like Molly said, like I told her to say. But so Boston means a lot to me. There's a lot going on there. It's full of past history. It's full of new ideas. There's a lot of art. There's a lot of structure. It's constantly in motion. Living in a city, um, having all of that change happen around you is kind of it's it's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to live around. Um, and so I want to start it out with this photo of Faneuil Hall, which is, old as balls, and it's currently surrounded by these really like modern architectural buildings, and that's kind of in essence what Boston's about, is this preservation of what is old and the construction of what is new. Um, there and there's all that building in between, that helps construct like what makes up the city. And I've spent so much time absorbing just what Boston is and what it holds, the spaces that we live in, we walk about. This is Frank Gehry's MIT Stata building, and it feels somewhere in between like some like tacky 2000s space film and like futuristic. I'm not really sure where it lies, but it's certainly not Faneuil Hall, and like there's such a range that it really, like, no matter where you walk, because it's awful for driving, it really enforces that idea of past and present, and the melding of the two, and combining them. And so that's kind of where my mind's been at, is the combination of the past and the present, where I was in the past, the things that I've absorbed in the past, and the things that I'm trying to express today, and where my mind's been. So really, because it's such a journey, the idea of past and present, I want to start you out with just like with me in general, the me in high school, and a journey through my art from high school, a little bit of gap to college, and then through my art that I've made to today. Um, and I made this probably, I think it was like senior year in high school, and it's this building. It's this really jumbled cluster of housing, and I never really thought much in high school. I don't know how many of you thought much in high school, but it's um yeah, indeed, yeah. No, it's very much like I had the aesthetic that I enjoyed. I had um the knowledge of being around housing and these architectural influences that um kind of tied together us as people and how we exist in the areas we are, whether it's like in a workplace and having this very big office building that kind of screams office building, or having these houses that are really old and built out of brick but still have like the balconies for people to spend their time, looking down on the cobblestone street, or whatever it may be. um, so that was there. It just wasn't processed. Um, and then I came here, and I was playing with the idea of architecture and layering, and really trying to um, figure out like what it was that like I couldn't see behind people's lives, like the interactions of different people, like sometimes you don't even like you say hi to somebody and they're looking down at their feet, walk by you, um, they don't say anything, and then other times you say hi and you end up having like a 20-minute conversation with them, and there's just so much going on that like I really felt the need to like express this, like what's hidden, what's not hidden. And so I found a way in doing that through the use of layering and overlapping of the buildings and the people, and like what people use as their functional everyday lives. Um, I moved on a little bit. I started moving towards more abstraction because I felt like a little bit literal in the sense that I was doing things. Um, so this is actually the 2D studio up here, and a drawing that I made of it. And in my brain, I was like, I just want to like abstract the things and leave only like the foundation of of what makes them like their in essence, like what constructs them. And it was just very like kind of an experimental period. Same with this piece, where I made this in art history, where I wanted that idea of like, well, we live here, and like this is the space we use, but like the space around was a little bit more ambiguous. I was just moving very much towards like kind of expressionist, like abstract, um, or geometric abstraction. Like I don't know, my brain was kind of all over the place at the time, and it felt a little bit too loose. So I moved back. I reeled it back, and I was like, I need it to re-represent. I need to figure out what it is we live in, what it is we do with the spaces, and how those spaces exist around us. And so I got really interested in the degradation of spaces that we leave untouched, or even like the outside of buildings that we live in for a long time, and we maintain the inside, but we kind of neglect the outer, the exterior of those spaces. Um, so I started constructing these buildings that, or these geometric kind of architectural forms that represented the spaces we were in, and then trying to construct the degradation of those over time. Um, and that didn't even feel right. That was my mapper work. So that was supposed to be, thought out, and now that I look back on it, it doesn't really feel that thought out. And so I reeled it back even more. I was like, I'm literally going to make buildings, and I'm going to construct the degradation of those buildings. Um, and that felt nice. It felt nice to make these buildings, these like spaces that could be, you could like interpret their use. It's like a house. The forms, but it just felt like a little bit uh, forced. I guess would be the word. Um, where the the buildings just, it's entirely me. It's my projection of what I see as the reality of the world on, and I was just recreating it. And I still think it's pretty, but it doesn't feel like what I was trying to achieve in my brain. So I moved to these works on perspective. And I really found kind of a home in perspective, because we all see things so differently. Um, and the components of a space are what make up how we use the space, how we feel about the space. Um, it's it's these objects that we've interacted. You're all sitting in chairs. You're all sitting at tables. You're sitting in a room that's built out of walls, built out of wood with paneling on top of framing, built on a foundation that just it constructs the world that we use as people. And so I figured, like, I can make these space. I can make like a window into these spaces. Um, and I spent too much time trying to figure out how you would look at the spaces from where I was standing. But it felt a bit closer to where I was trying to get to, with the idea of space and perspective, and how you view uh, the places that we use, and things that feel familiar. So I also made this painting at the same time that was a collapsing of the 3D versions, right? Like trying to flatten these perspectives and make them something that feels, it's familiar. You know what the things are, but there's these intrusions of floating blocks and like overlaying lines, and it just like trying to tie together those those feelings of wanting a space to be more united and less thought of as individual components. And that's really all I have for up until this work is all I have. And so this year, or really this summer, I was thinking about like, well, do I how do I tie these places together better? How do I like represent this idea of like past and present, the degradation, the layering, all of these things? How do I put them all together? And this is a photo I took of Mass Mocha. It's a absolutely gorgeous museum in Massachusetts. Um, Really, as far as museums go, it has my heart. Um, it's a giant factory, warehouse. I'm not really sure what it is. I should know, but I know it's beautiful. I know that the people that designed the space wanted to maintain that past history, to maintain the use that it was originally for, allow it to go through the process of just natural breakdown, wear, tear, like all that. Like there's windows that are broken, and then re and then add their like new additions to it so that it became a functional space for people, so that you could present art in it and walk about it, and it gives you a feeling of history, kind of like how walking through Boston gives you this sense of history, where you're walking past these giant brick buildings and then moving on to these even bigger concrete structures that just like there's a progression that you can see as you move through the space. Um, and this is a photo that I took in Texas, I think, and it was an abandoned building. Um, just there's a rusted car outside with all the electronics torn out of it, and I just thought that this was such a beautiful, like the chipping of the paint, the broken wood, the broken glass, um, the way that it had all weathered naturally. Um, I thought created like its own sort of painting, sculpture, somewhere in between, where it's this abstraction of architectural space, um, and just using that natural like past history of the thing, the color that the other people put on it, the wood that they chose to use, the style that they chose to build it in, was all very important, I'm sure, when they built it. But it almost it's somewhere between it doesn't matter now, and it's this new creation, and I chose to frame it, um, picking out these pieces that I thought were important. And so, as you guys probably noticed, like my work in the gallery, is pretty much entirely made out of um, recycled wood, recycled material. And I don't think that this is a show about upcycling. My thoughts weren't really on the side of upcycling and renewal of things, but they were on the side of growth and the taking of the past, taking of the present, and finding that middle ground. Um, where your ideas and something that's out of your control is able to come together and create like some sort of harmony and beauty. And I find beauty in the degradation of these materials because they show their past history. We live their past history. We live in buildings. We experience the walls, but we don't necessarily experience their destruction and their like travel through the process of transformation. And granted, transformation for these things was just being sent off to the dump. But like Rick told me about this building that was being renovated in Incline, and I went over there. I thought the materials were just really beautiful and really useful. Clay felt a little bit too tedious, and I didn't want to construct those things. I just wanted for those things, the degradation that I was constructing, I wanted that to speak for itself. I wanted that to actually be natural. I wanted that to happen on its own time. I didn't want to try and recreate the idea of damage and of wear and of use and the history that this other thing brought to itself. So I took all the works or all these pieces of wood. Um, I didn't cut much up. I didn't want to. I thought that the pieces were kind of beautiful on their own. I snapped a few of them in half. I cut a few of them in half just so I'd have a bit more material. But I really tried to work with the like what I was given, what was presented to me, um, what I came across and thought was pretty. So in my mind, I felt it deserved to be respected and honored in its natural progression of life. Um, and like you can see where people took like probably a crowbar and tore these pieces off the wall. You can see where they undrilled all of the framing and like where they tore off the trim for the buildings. And I wanted to maintain that because I thought it was important to the pieces, the material that I was given. That was its past history, and it's about respect and finding my vision and own um, its own like damage and the look that it presents, and then working with that and coming to a middle ground. Um, so I'm gonna interrupt this with some art history, and I really respect Louise Nevelson. I think she was doing great things using really pushing that found object idea. Um, here I am finding these materials that were going to be thrown away. She's taking these materials that have that same idea of kind of a domestic, familiar feel. Uh, Things that we're comfortable with, things that we know and can recognize. And then combining them all, layering them so that they are able to build upon each other and create a new space. And she would paint all of them a solid color so that they united, and that makes sense. Just there's so much, there are so many things in these pieces that they're all familiar, but they have a disconnect, so you want to unite them. And my solution to that was to take the spaces that we inhabit and we use, take the framing, take the wall paneling, take the trim on the floor, the door frames, the door handles, all of those things. And in my mind, those unite themselves. Those are the spaces that we use. Those are the things that we use. The places that we inhabit, and they all feel familiar because I know you've all lived in a house. You've all been in a building, and maybe you haven't seen the framing. Maybe you haven't like worked with like building a structure and taking those 2x4s and building the actual frame of the building to like nail the wall paneling into, to then like put the trim on and the doors and like whatever, like it doesn't matter. Like there's some connection to all those pieces that like maybe you've just driven by it and registered it, and it feels like it can speak to more people than just the feeling that I was trying to put into it while I was like driving nails into it and shooting it together with screws. And so in a way, that's my way of painting it entirely black. You know, is using something that is one structure, to create something new. And like same with this door piece that I've made. It's, you know, there's a lot of things that you can put on this. It's a little religious with this cross-like nature. You can register it's a door. You know, those are the door panels. You could turn the handle. I don't know if you did, but you could. It works. And like that's all really important to me, is like this, the inherent nature of the material, and then just kind of figuring out a way to rearrange it and repurpose it and make it a conversation between all of the pieces that feels like home, literally, figuratively, but then also feels new and different. And Gene Blackburn does a similar thing, reducing physical objects to their framework, removing material from these objects, and recognizing that it's because of their past use and their familiarity, and knowing that you'll recognize that even once those materials have been removed, and then creating uh, something beautiful out of just their framework, out of just the things that hold them together as like their objectness, you know, their kind of not like boundaries, but like the essentially like their boundaries of an object, you know, just how like you know what they are you know they've changed, you know it's still there, but it's something new. And here's one of her prints that I really like. A lot of her painting prints do the same thing of this flattening of layers, the compression of a space, how we view inside outside. There's a person walking on the table, which is supposed to be the floor, and the chairs aren't even in the room. And like it's all very like you understand all of it, but and you know the components of it, and it draws upon the architectural feeling that you get from walking into a space, whether it be your house or an office building or whatever. Like, you know those components, and it's just rewording it into a more layered, more obscure, more interpretive version of what it was. And so I have a lot of drawings in there. I have this table full of blueprints. I made these. Um, I made a tape version on the wall, and I made a tape version on next to the blueprints. But to me, that feels like acknowledging the process of how these things fit together, how I'm going to structure them, um, and then kind of letting go of that ideal situation and letting the material speak for itself. So all of the rules for how things will go together, how these pieces connect and are shot together with nails and screws, and the steps for them, I wanted to put into the blueprints. Um, and that was important because that was it's the process of where my mind's at. You know, the ideal situation for like the way that these pieces will fit together, and then listening to the material that I have taken in and been presented, and respecting its past nature, and respecting the way that it's broken apart, and letting that speak for itself. The inherent damage and color, and um, the way that the screws are shot through, and there's rusted nails in there. Like, I wanted all that to be visible and remain, because it's not about it being my work. It's about my feelings being expressed through the how this material wants to work with me. And so there's like this play of the material feels one way, I feel another, and we're trying to find a balance, and that connection of how we arrange things, how we put things together. And it's a little ugly, it's a little dangerous, but it feels right. Like, there was a lot of things that I shot together and then had to take apart to move things, because it just felt a little bit too like I was either like I would cut a piece and be like, you're gonna sit next to that one, and it didn't feel like that was what the material wanted to do. And so I had to find that compromise of letting the material speak for itself, and letting that past history show through. And I think that it speaks to these bigger ideas, the expansion of these ideas, where I have this blueprint for this full building structure that you could like walk into, and I have a decently big one downstairs, but like um like I didn't have the material or the time for any of this. And this one I made it out of tape. And like the tape idea is just trying to blow it up, trying to expand the drawings, trying to expand my ideals upon um, things that I either don't have the means for, or there just isn't the um yeah, no, it's just like there isn't the material for it, but like the ideas are still there. And so like I want to be able to visualize that in some way. And same with the big building. It's I don't have the materials for it, I don't have the time for it, but it's something that's important to me, and it's a feeling that I have of wanting to like expand and grow and move upon like idea to from the the blueprint to the model to the actual structure. And that's all really important to me. So I wasn't going to ignore that and only listen to the material, because I'm allowed to have those ideas, and those ideas are allowed to exist. So so they need their own space to exist. And then there are things that they don't fit the the material. I didn't have enough material to build a full wall, but I wanted a wall to speak to another wall. And so I made this piece. Well, I made a lot of pieces, and this piece really kind of, when I went into the gallery, which as a space is also this other thing I'm bringing in. I'm going to respect that space, and I'm going to listen to what that space has to say. Um, I found this, or I had this piece, and it had that diagonal on it. There's a boundary, a corner in the gallery that feels like it needs a wall, feels like it wants a wall in front of this door. And so I wanted to start blending the idea of that inside outside perspective, whether this wall was the back wall and its lines just kind of followed the perspective lines, or whether it was like this outside wall that like created an inner space. Um, and there's like part of it is just luck, and part of it is like I feel like I listened to the material and I came to the material with my idea of my knowledge of what the space was, and just wanted it to speak a similar language. The the ducks, the weird corners, the kind of industrial feel of the building. I just like all of it kind of spoke the same language, and I knew I was going to be in that space, so it it felt there is a connection there, and I'm really glad that this piece worked out to fit in this way, to blend the perspectives of the back wall, its wall, the space in between. And off of that, Rachel Whiteread, Rick, thank you for showing me her. Absolutely amazing. That idea of the unseen, the space that we see all the time, it's there. It's always there. We live in it. It's the space that we use. But it's not really seen. It's not really felt. You don't understand the negative space that you exist in until you have something that actually portrays the room that you're in. And so Rachel Whiteread takes concrete, she takes plaster, silicone, rubber, like whatever, and we'll make molds out of anything, like t-shirts, rooms, houses, um, and it conveys that idea of that space that's unseen and turning the inside into the outside. And like these are her rooms. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. I think they're made of plaster. Not really sure. But they really speak to the idea of the unseen, the untouched, the place that we use, and then turning it into a place that is seen. And so, along with that, like I was making these concrete molds of the inner spaces of the structures that I was creating, because in my mind that it talked to that idea of there's the space that we exist in, the models of the places, and then there's the spaces inside that we actually use functionally. And I cut it up. Just one more. Yeah. And that's all I really had to say, honestly. Thank you, Molly. I'm rambling at this point, but it's no, like it is that idea of the unseen, the interior, um, that interests me, the outside, the inside, the projection of both onto each other. And yeah, no, that's my show, really.
Thank you, Gabe. All right, let's open it up for a few questions.
Julia,
Like killer talk.
thank you.
I'm so impressed. It was like so exciting to listen to you talk through all of your thoughts because I don't really have a lot of opportunities to do that with you, I think. And it was just like I was so in the whole time, and that was really cool. I loved how you talked about your perspective on the combination of history and present and future. Like I'm from here, but whenever I'm on the East Coast, I feel that. I totally relate to that feeling of like this kind of combination of past and present, and I thought that was a beautiful way. And when you said you found a home in perspective, I like almost cried. But my question is, if you find any relationship between the way you're working and how it might influence, well, how you're working, like combining past and present, and how does it influence you or make you think about your own personal past stuff?
Yeah, I mean that's that's a lot. I have an understanding of my past. I'm not sure if it's something I necessarily need to express fully, but there's parts of it that need to be talked about and need to be kind of communicated. But really, in any interaction with anybody, you're coming to the table with your past history, and so are they. And so you can't, like the blueprints are, you can't, like, you can have an idea of what you want. You can, like, lay it out and be like, this is ideally what I want, but really you're taking in their history along with yours, and you're trying to find that blending point, and you're trying to find, like, how do you make that work, how can I work with that. And so, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that. Nikki?
Could you speak about the doorknobs, the doors, what they mean symbolically or visually to you as far as entrances or exits go in the structures themselves?
So I kind of see the objects that I made as compressed rooms, in a sense. I'm taking the floors, I'm taking the frame of the wall, the paneling, and I'm flattening it. It's, you understand what the pieces are, but it it shifts in its own perspective. Um, and I think that the doorways are an entrance or an exit to a space. And there's three doors, four if you count the garage door that was closed, into that space. And that's the space that I'm allowing you into. It's the space that I use to create the feeling of what I'm having, and allowing you access into. But there's more, there's a lot of things that are either hidden behind closed doors, or just, you're not the person for me to tell that to. So
Is that why the one door has a wall behind it and you can't quite get anywhere through it?
basically, like,
I was
it's
curious about that.
it's
I was
like,
wondering
you
about
can
that.
you can turn the knob. I made sure all the knobs turned, so you can feel like you want to get in there.
Yeah, but I mean, there's no way to.
Yeah, it's a blocked off connection, and there's more behind that area, but it's either not for you or not for now. And so, yeah, like, doorways, entrances
Was
to
there any
other
reason
people.
why they were red? The two of them were red and then the one was white. Was it because those were the types of doors you found, or was there?
They were painted red.
painted?
Yeah, really, I'm gonna be honest. I could say something about that, but uh, like, I think that having the two red doors, I almost got rid of one of them, but I think having that, um, the color going around the room felt more unifying as a space as a whole. And same, there's three pieces with, like, kind of the light blue turquoisey color, and I felt that I could have flipped them around. Those pieces worked equally well the opposite way, but what you would be seeing is wood colored, like these tables, but old and weathered. And I kind of wanted that color to help bring, yeah, some vibrance, and some, like, connection through the building, as you could still see that weathered color Lauren? I think that they belong on walls. The ones that are on walls belong on walls. Yeah. Um, they speak more structural painting to me. They speak like a three-dimensional layering of pieces to create that idea of overlapping sections of a building, the doors, the framing, like all of that. Like it's I don't really want to make 2D works where I'm painting the things. It same with clay. It feels like a little too tedious and a little too like I'm creating it and I'm not just taking the material and letting it do its thing. So I think they belong on walls, but I think of them as almost other spaces in the space that you're in, or windows into those spaces.
All right, let's get one last question. Okay.
Lizzie and then Rick, I guess.
I'm interested in the use of the gallery space as a collective. The space is very full.
Mm.
In listening to your talk, reflecting on the different work, knowing you for quite some time, I read this work in the gallery as an internal self-portrait. And I'm interested in the use of space in that regard, and what is that trying to convey to your reader?
There's a lot of thoughts in my head. I have a lot going on in this thing. I have trouble processing all of them. But I do know that there's some like structure and some like coherence to those thoughts because I don't know, sometimes I think about like fluffy ducks. I don't, like something random, but like really like the thoughts have like some coherence. There's a process to thinking through those. And so I wanted to have spaces for all of those processes, having a table for the models and having a table for the blueprints and having uh, the space essentially be made out of the blueprints or even like having what's on the walls be the blueprints. It feels like a progression. It feels like growth. Um, it's an insight into to what is there and what's happening and what continues to happen. So yeah,
I'm going to make a blanket statement. I appreciate the discourse tonight. I appreciate the discourse in the last 5, now 6 PFAs that have happened in the last 3 weeks. The discourse, the level of discourse, the interdisciplinary thought, the ability to make connections in work, not only personally, but historically, the context, socially, has been pretty magical. That said, you use the word pretty. Pretty is quite subjective. And when you said that, and thinking about Gabe and the word pretty, there's this subjective space that I read through, and you use that term, and I'm just like, okay, what is Gabe's pretty? What is Gabe's pretty when it comes to this social construct that we live in, which I think you're really battling with, trying to
Is it now? Is that an easy question? What I think is pretty. Oh man, go fuck yourself. No, 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 but for real, like, there's, I find things that are truly them, the things that they've been brought through, and how they're presented now, and even how they'll be presented later. I think if that's authentically them, I think that that's pretty. I find beauty in that. There's It's naturalness. It's the problem that I had with my past work, of where I was trying to construct the deconstructed or the degradation, where it's that's my choice, and I need that out of my control to truly feel like it is speaking to itself and then speaking to me, to be authentic in itself and then tell me what to do with it, and what it's okay with. So I think there's a lot of things that do a lot of different stuff, where like the 2x4s break differently than the wall paneling, but it's the natural choice of those to degrade on their own that I find beautiful, is I guess what I was